Watch The Atheist Experience live Sundays at 4:30 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTAXP and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callaxp.
It's time to get sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show that would be a whole lot prettier if it just smiled once in a while. I'm Christy Powell. My co-host tonight is the SecX patron saint of sex work. Welcome, Arden Hart.
Howdy.
And I want to express incredible gratitude tonight because our featured guest, Tanjil Wright, is currently experiencing a major power outage. And at the very last possible second, we had our incredible panel step up. So returning to the show tonight is Laura Magee.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me on so quickly.
Yes, super glad that you were able to make it. I really appreciate you showing up. And of course, we are joined by Mandisa Thomas.
Hello, I think this is my first time on Secular Sexuality. Maybe
we get to be
second?
here first.
I think
second time.
maybe
I
the
remember.
second.
I
Yes,
wasn't here
okay.
for it. You were
So
with
this is my
Serafina, I
second,
believe.
Okay, yes.
But
Okay,
I'm
you
claiming it.
remember
I'm
that
claiming it.
now.
There's actually a joke about you later on in the show. We'll get to it.
Oh gosh.
Well, as you can see, tonight is going to be full of girl boss talk and looking at the impact of gender within the atheist community. So call in with your questions at 512-991-9242 or at tiny.cc/callsex because while I'm not, the show is coming right now.
All right. Well, that sound means that we are going to start this week the way we do every week with what's turning us on this week. Mandisa, super glad that you were able to come back and join us tonight. What's got you turned on right now? What's got you excited?
You know, I'm excited about BN's new YouTube show called In the Cut, and not cutting in the way that I know that phrase is kind of going out of style.
Sure.
But we have a brand new YouTube show called In the Cut, which is hosted by our New York City affiliate organizer, Kevon Cameron. And this gets our members and our supporters up close with what BN is doing on the ground and the programs that we have coming up. And what we will be working on and asking for our partnered organizations to for support for, and our members to join us in doing in the future. We're going to have some special guests. Our first show was on New Year's Day, and it went very, very well. We featured Sundria Hall with My Choice, My Power Counseling. And I am just very excited about where this show is going to go for 2022 and beyond.
Yeah, glad to hear it. We were able to meet with Kevon just about 6 or 8 months ago here on the show. So regular guests regular viewers should be familiar. Sounds like exciting work. Arden, what's got you turned on this week?
I'm going to be short and simple about it this time. It's bell bottoms. Bell-bottom jeans. You know, I heard some whispers on TikTok that only millennials and old people were still into skinny jeans. And I was skeptical because I have been a long-term fan of skinny jeans. But I got like 2 pairs of bell-bottoms just today. They came in the mail and by God, my butt looks so good. So I'm going to say bell-bottom. That's my turn on for this week.
Yeah, I'm going to take the phrase millennials and old people and be maybe a little bit turned off, but I'm here for these jeans. I'm here for these jeans.
Not me.
Laura, how about yourself? What's got you turned on this week?
Well, first of all, Arden, I have to say that is so freaking hot. Like, I remember in high school, I used to love wearing bell-bottom jeans, even though at that point they weren't in style. They were just comfortable and freaking cute. So more power to you, girl. What's got me turned on is the show Sexplanations on YouTube. It's done by Dr. Lindsay Doe, and she is just this cute, hot, spunky little sex educator who makes everything simple, funny, easy to understand, and she doesn't beat around the bush. So all of her videos are really fun. but they're also really factual. So if you are looking for sex education for yourself or for a young adult, like if you have children that are growing into young adulthood and need a little bit of help along the way, Sexplanations is a really sweet, cute, fun, spunky way of getting some good sex education.
Awesome. Well, glad to hear it. Thank you so much. I'm really excited that we were able to gather all of y'all here, especially at the last minute, because this is a really important topic that I feel like flies under the radar in so many ways. We're going to be talking tonight about something that I can't speak on in the least bit. So I'm going to do my best to kind of facilitate this conversation and get the hell out of the way, because I'm really interested in what it is like to be a woman in the atheist community. You know, I think that we can all agree that that stereotype caricature of like the angry college freshman that's like covered in acne and like screaming into his laptop is not a completely accurate representation of our community. But I'm curious how that image of like the grumpy man, how that resonates for y'all, or if that's something that y'all have experienced or could speak on it at all.
Okay, so I'll fill in the silence. I always want to let
Sure.
somebody else go first, but since y'all are being so quiet, when I first joined the atheist community, I didn't even really think about my gender as being a thing, right? Like it didn't even really enter into the conversation. But I think that you're right. As I got more into the activist community and as I'm reading more about like, especially with the religious response to atheists, it really does paint a picture of this sort of male dominated, sort of geeky, hyper intellectual, angry, or the picture of just like the sinner who just hates God and wants to do all the sins, and so they've given up
Eat
religion.
babies and fuck
Right,
around.
right,
And,
right.
yeah.
It's sort of like that devil worshiping satanic, and there's these sort of pictures out there that are really kind of hyperbolic and a little bit insane. So knowing that there are so many out there like myself and Arden and Mandisa who are just regular everyday people, getting our voices out there to me is really powerful and really kind of like I'm inspired by the women I saw before I started. People like the two of them and like Shannon Q and people like that who are getting our female voices out there with Augusto.
Yeah. Anything y'all would add to that idea?
Oh gosh. So I'm going to try to sum this up
Sure.
briefly, because this is something that could be like at least a three-parter. We, especially women, and I'm saying this as, a Black woman in this movement, which as in public faces and leadership is changing, but is still smaller in number. I remember when I first became involved in this community and wanting to just lend my hand to it, wanting to become more involved, and just being really excited. I was quickly reminded of the challenges that Black women just face in general when it comes to underrepresentation, being labeled. I always have to be mindful that I'm not this totally angry Black woman, right? There's this idea that, we're either we're too angry about something, and also that we speak for the entire Black community and the entire Black atheist demographic. And we're also here to like almost bear the brunt of, especially when we start speaking up. I remember when I first got involved, and with my personality, it is very strong. I am very assertive. There was sort of this, well, you need to stay in your place because all of the men are talking, especially some of the Black men. And, I was like, no, fuck that. I'm like, if I'm going to be involved in this movement, then if I'm doing the work, then my voice needs to be heard. And so does the voice of other women. So that has been a constant battle. It's also us feeling like we're being splained We're having everything
Mhm.
explained to us. It's like, well, it can't, it's not that bad, or you're just overreacting, you're just being, yeah, we go through a whole bunch of that shit. And also there is certainly a lot of deference to the male voice still, that most of the men get more of the recognition and the acknowledgement more than the women do. And so there's been just a lot of that as well. And being on the ground and actually being the one to organize and set things up. We're often the ones doing most of the work, which is, I when I stepped up and dedicated myself to this, I'm in it all the way, but I will tell you, it gets exhausting and frustrating at
Mhm.
times.
Yeah, well, fair to say.
Yeah, I think there's also kind of this interesting thing where I feel like people uh, sort of position like uh, atheism and maybe like logic and reasoning kind of at one end of a spectrum, and that's like the
Mhm.
masculine end, and then over here is like the like spirituality or like meekness, to use some like Christianese, and that's for women. Like it's kind of like positioned innately in our culture as like with patriarchy that logic and reasoning, those are masculine traits. So by nature, like women wouldn't want to be atheists, right? Or they couldn't be, because that's just like such an unfeminine thing.
Yeah, well, and there's so much rhetoric, particularly within Christianity, or at least the evangelical Christianity that I grew up in, that says that, like, as for me and my house, the idea is that, like, the man says and then the woman follows, and that creates a lot of complications here. It's worth pointing out that according to the 2014 Religious Landscape Study, about 7 in every 10 U.S. atheists are men. Why do you all suppose that is?
I mean, it's the same stuff, right? It's like with the privilege of being a man, you're probably more likely to be pushed into a field that's going to get you an education that might point out to you some of the issues with religion. Like,
Mm.
I'm sure that's not the only factor at play, but I definitely think a lot of these social influences come together at sort of a peak there, and that's why you see it a lot of fields like this. They're dominated at the top by men, and I think that is in general largely due to the privilege afforded to men for just being like their voice is heard. They're taken seriously when they say things. Yeah, I don't know if y'all have any different takes.
No, I don't know. I think that that's definitely one of them, and I try to brainstorm because obviously, like, I don't actually have the answer. But when I'm trying to brainstorm what different possibilities can go into that, that's certainly one of the first ones that I think of. But there's also this idea that, like, women sort of follow their husbands, in terms of their belief systems, and I don't think
Hmm.
that's true across the board. So do not get me wrong. I'm not making that statement, but I do think there's this sort of cultural undertone of that happening quite a bit. And then I think the other thing is maybe fear of representation, right? Like, so men, when they want to represent their views, will sort of like get out there and do it. And certainly there's those strong female leads that will get out and do the same thing. But I think on average, men are more likely to, yes, this is what I believe, and put it in a survey, whereas women are more likely to be like, well, I'm spiritual but not religious, or like not really stand up and want to rock the boat quite as much. And this is all off the top of my head, and there's a lot of generalization that can go into it. And so we do need to be careful to start or to be not throw things out there too haphazardly. We could be completely wrong, but those are some of the sort of off the cuff things that I think about.
Yeah, I certainly don't want any of you to feel obligated to speak for all women, or anything silly like that. But I am really interested to hear about y'all's experiences, because from the other side of it, like, I definitely see that piece. When I myself lost or threw away my faith, the truth is, I sat on that secret for a solid year before I was willing to share it with my wife. The
Wow.
person who I was very concerned that I was responsible for her salvation, for her spiritual leadership. And when I stepped away, I was like, well, I don't think I'm going to hell. I'm pretty sure I've made peace with this, but just in case, like I don't want to be responsible for that. And I've worked really hard myself to kind of deconstruct some of those misogynistic ideas, but I know that they show up not just in myself, but in our society in a lot of different ways.
I'd like to add to that, in addition to everything y'all have said, and because of the fact that women may not necessarily um, speak up as much. If you're a mother and like a partner, or wife, or a spouse, or what have you, and you're working full time, more often than not, we as women are wearing so many different hats. So there are so many different things that we have to consider before we make a decision like this. And due to, societal stigma, as well as other things that could adversely affect us, we have to be very careful at times before we speak, or even, express this, and stepping out there just to face the possibility that you may be alone in this. Because even for some of us who are okay with sort of being, I guess, or standing in solitude somewhat, you still want to know that you have a community and support behind you. And women, from my observance and experience, my own experience, we tend to have a lot more to lose as far as judgment, as far as ostracism, as far as people not taking us seriously. We often have to fight more uphill battles and consider more than just ourselves before we make this decision. And that doesn't mean that men don't have the same responsibility, but more often that burden falls on women to have to deal with the consequences of that. And sadly, at times at the hands of other women. It's this is an unfortunate fact, and this is an unfortunate reality. But the fact that we do have to face these things, we have to think of all of these different, all of these different possibilities and all of these different angles before making this decision to speak up. Probably contributes to that. Now, I have seen more women speaking up. I've seen more women become more brave and take those risks, and that's because there are more of us who are putting ourselves out here for people to know that there is support and a foundation for them to do so. Probably more, a few years prior to that, it was probably certainly less. And again, we still have to, because we have all of these roles that we take on, much often at times with with less support, we have to consider these things.
Yeah, I kind of want to jump on what Mandisa just said because I really can feel that. Like I'm a very very outspoken woman. I've always been outspoken. Ever since I was a little girl, I was outspoken. So I've never really not represented myself. But I've definitely had the fears and the hold back for at least a certain amount of time before it like bottles up and just explodes out of me. And I think this was definitely one of the times when it did was when I decided to give up religion. I didn't have any problem telling people that I went from Christianity to Islam or from my agnostic, teenhood to my Christian, early 20s. But I really had a difficult time going from any sort of religious identity to an atheist identity. And a lot of that had to do with fear, but it was fear of not being able to explain myself well enough or um, like being seen as sort of a weak person or stupid or dumb. Like, oh, well, you just changed your minds all willy nilly. So clearly you don't know what you're talking about. And so me being a female, I always struggle with that, wanting to sound intelligent and wanting to know that people see me as competent and smart. And I feel like I have to work twice as hard sometimes to make that happen because the default setting is, oh, well, she just doesn't know any better. Oh, well, she just, like one of the things one of my family members said when I deconverted was, oh, I just didn't explain that well enough to you to where you would understand it. And even though they were trying to take the blame on themselves, like, oh, I didn't do a good enough job explaining. What I heard was, oh, you didn't understand what I was trying to explain. And that's the reason, like, as though it comes down to that one conversation that we had, right, was the whole reason why I'm not religious. But there really was that sense of, oh, you just don't get it. And so, yeah, it was more of a pride thing. But when Mandisa was talking, it really, really hit me hard that, yeah, we do have a lot riding on putting ourselves out there. Is she competent? Is she capable? Is she strong enough? Is there any weight behind her words? Whereas, and men, do correct me in chat if I am wrong, and Christy, correct me if I'm wrong, but men seem to have this automatic authority about them where if they think something or present an idea, there's not this instant judgment of, well, now you have to prove yourself.
Yeah, I think that if we want to imagine religion as a oppressive institution, that it's going to be more effective on people with less power. Yeah, that just makes sense in a lot of ways. There's less opportunity to maybe push back or to resist some of those things. You know, in getting ready for this episode, I spent about a half an hour looking at sort of silly, like top 50 most famous living atheist, type lists. And while most of them were garbage, I did find one that it featured at least 4 different SecX guests, which I was really excited about. Mandisa, you were on that list. I'm counting you as one of those 4. So yes, you had been on the show.
Okay.
But in looking at just list after list after list, I only found one that actually included a woman in the top 15. So, even if I'm not willing to put a whole lot of power behind those lists, I have to ask, how do y'all feel that like celebrity impacts the community or impacts the people who are like maybe drawn towards atheist activism?
I don't know necessarily if there's like an answer. Maybe one of you two feel differently, broadly speaking, but I do think some of the more recent history of atheism impacts that, because a lot of the people who we consider these like big celebrities right now, like Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins, and maybe formerly people like Sargon of Akkad or something, who people will dispute whether he's an atheist or not, I suppose, but it fostered this community of like anti-SJW kind of like anti-feminist sentiment that I think is still really, really prevalent in the community.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not surprising to me if those people are kind of on these lists, that those kind of voices are the ones that are being dominated, and those are the hurdles that we're facing when we're dealing with other members of the community. Like I can't tell you how many times I've been on an episode of nonprofits or something, and we talked about trans issues for one topic, and in the comments, sure enough, there's someone going, oh my God, I can't believe we're bringing this kind of stuff up again. Like, why is everything about SJWs now? Like, why is everything about social justice? With like clearly no regard from these people of like what the demographics of atheists probably look like outside of the Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris types. The reason that probably a lot of other people who don't look like that might come to atheism.
Not to mention just the basic concept that anti-religious work or atheist activism is about confronting oppression, is about social justice issues. So it feels very silly, but you're right. I mean, you can go to the comment section of damn near any atheist video and find a lot of that type of like red pilly sort of rhetoric.
Oh my gosh. And that speaks to whenever I am on a show or an appearance and people want to know, why the hell is there an organization called Black Nonbelievers? Why, does there need to be a white nonbelievers? This certainly the intersection of our activism seems to be completely lost on that. And it's interesting. This idea of what it means to be a celebrity. While I appreciate the fact that I have made some top lists over, and I'm not sure if I was in that 15 or not, I probably wasn't, but when people see us do those shows, I will tell you what happens when people when I am on a show. Usually I get asked a lot more questions. People need a lot more in the way of support, or we may get the trolls. And I have to wonder if the men who I am co-hosting with or who are on the shows get these same questions, or when they put out a call for support, do they automatically get it, as opposed to myself, who, when I call for support for my organization or even for myself, I get a lot of accolades, people saying that, they support what I do, but that doesn't always equate to the type of support that is needed, which is mostly financial. And so there is also a disparity there when it comes to women in the movement, women content creators, women leaders, where often our work isn't as taken as seriously as it would if a man was at the head of it, which is unfortunate. And so sometimes when I hear, oh, you're a celebrity, sometimes I cringe, because I'm like,
Sure.
well, I don't want fans. I mean, I appreciate those who, when they see and hear me speak, I do appreciate that they feel supported in some way. But I'm like, I prefer more supporters than fans. I prefer the people who will actually put their money where their mouths are when the calls for support come. And so I'm sure that the men who are in, or the men who are in these top slots, are probably getting the support that is still lacking on our end.
Yeah, well, we've been kind of poking around this idea for a little bit, but according to that same study that I referenced, atheists, at least in America, tend to be younger, more educated, and more white than the average American. I'm curious what kind of culture y'all feel like that creates, and whether or not the homogeny of American atheism is challenging for women.
I think for one thing, what it creates is the same thing that, and I hate to say it, but like the same thing that religious organizations create. It creates sort of a echo chamber, and it creates sort of a lot of the ignorance, and it's the same kind of ignorance as you find in other communities, which is really shocking. You'd almost think that if you go into an atheist community, you're going to get a lot of openness, you're going to get a lot of questions, a lot of skepticism, but also a lot of flexibility and acceptance. But you don't. You actually get the same thing that Mandisa is talking about, and I've seen it in her chats. I've seen it in chats about trans issues, like Arden's talking about. So I don't fall victim as much as the other two do to it, but I see it in chat and I see it in conversation, where a lot of the times people are like, "Well, this doesn't exist," and "Well, what about that?" And they're just as virulent against some of our issues as outside organizations are, which you wouldn't necessarily expect. I think what that shows is that within the atheist community, we are a group of people that are not above all the same stereotyping and the same forms of racism or misogyny or what's the other word that I'm looking for? I mean, it leads to like a lot of sexism and stuff. Um, Atheism doesn't necessarily automatically cleanse you of all those social baggage, I guess, is what you would call it.
For sure.
Right, but as a community, and I'm sorry, Arden,
No, you're
I'm just
good.
going to step in here. As a community that prides itself on stepping away from religion and its dogma, there certainly is one thing I've said at the onset of my activism and my involvement is that people have left the church and they left religion, but they still have that baggage, and it is going to be up to the individuals to continue to unlearn and relearn as we go along. One of the beauties of our position is that it doesn't just stop with the God concept, or it isn't supposed to. We're supposed to be improving on our education and our information, which I think there's a difference there. There is a difference between being educated and being informed. And that doesn't just stop with our either our non-belief or our lifelong non-belief, or those who have left religion. That is supposed to be something that we continue to That's something that's supposed to be a way of life for us, or it should be. That any new information, we take it into consideration, and consider, and also consider how it makes the others, or how it affects and impacts us and others around us, right? It's supposed to, I mean, it should make us more well-rounded individuals and more well-rounded thinkers. Like Laura said, that doesn't automatically equate to that. It's a process. And there are people who need to understand that it's still a process, and that you're not above learning something because you felt like you've come to this place.
Yeah, I think actually I'm gonna give Arden a chance to speak first, but yeah.
Okay, I was just gonna say, I think that, for like a really long time, these Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins types have been talking about how religion oppresses LGBT people and how religion oppresses people of color for so long. They've been using these things to justify their like strong stances against religion, but they've been talking about us, women, queer people, people of color in the abstract for so long that I think now that these communities are gaining more acceptance and gaining more, power and starting to be seen within these communities, now they're having to contend with the fact that they can't talk about us in the abstract anymore. They have to actually like talk to us and wrestle with like not just how religion oppresses us, but how their words and their actions can still be oppressive, even though they've maybe, as Mandisa was pointing out, thinking that they've let go of some of this baggage of holding the God belief. They still haven't let go of the baggage of the culture that they were raised in that told them that like, if you see a man acting this way, that's a bad thing because that's feminine, or if you have these preconceived notions about this group of people, like that's okay because we see in this statistic this thing happens. I think this is just going to be something that hopefully will get better with time as we have more conversations like this, with more of the women and queer people and people of color within the atheist community being forward facing. But I think it's going to be a slow change, unfortunately, because I think a lot of these beliefs, these sort of like anti-SJW beliefs, are deeply rooted within our community, and But that's why I'm so glad to be here on this lovely panel with these lovely ladies to hopefully
Yes.
keep
Yeah,
pushing
well, and
the cogs of time in the right direction.
Well, and I definitely want to follow up on some of the things that y'all are touching on. But Laura, I wanted to give you a chance to jump in before we move on.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think what I was going to say was already very well said by the other two, so I
Sure.
don't need to get into it too much. But it was just talking about the idea that bigotry, sexism, and racism, they're unconscious biases that sometimes we don't even know we have, and we don't even know
Mhm.
when we're doing it. And so, just leaving a religion isn't really good enough. And we have to remember that atheism only answers one question, and that's whether or not we believe in a God. It doesn't talk about our politics, our education, our social standing, what we've been exposed to or not exposed to. So it almost doesn't surprise me that there's still a lot that we have to work through in the community in terms of educating each other, but we also have to be patient with each other.
Yeah, well, and it makes a certain kind of sense that, the four of us operating not just on YouTube, but in particular in these spaces where people might go to as they are starting to drift away from religion, when they are sort of in that initial phase of leaving religion, that those sorts of folks, and I want to be really clear, I love the atheist community. I've been a member of the atheist community of Austin for years now. I'm very passionate about the work that we do. So I don't want to make it sound like I'm looking down on our audience or on our community writ large. But it is, I think, fair to say that a lot of folks find these YouTube shows and these different kinds of things at a moment when they are like just about or just recently started to pull away and are still kind of early on in deconstructing some of these beliefs. And one of the ways that I feel like that shows up is that the statistics when you talk to queer folks are pretty overwhelming, that people within the LGBTQ plus community are much, much, much more likely to identify as not believing in a god or gods than your average American. And yet, I don't really feel like they're particularly well represented in the media or in the leadership of this community. I mean, certainly, Arden, we're all very familiar and proud of your work and a lot of the things that go on this show as well. But is that fair to say that perhaps the queer folks are also not as well represented, and that there's a lot of particular pressure on queer women?
Definitely. I mean, I think that's kind of transparently so. Like, not to keep harping on Richard Dawkins,
Sure.
but I mean, he keeps sticking his own foot in his
Oh,
mouth,
man.
so I'll keep hammering it. You know, like,
Ugh.
it's hard not to see how these things are prevalent in our community when one of the most well-known figures in atheism for maybe I don't know how high you want to put him on the list. It doesn't really matter, but he's spreading documents, that are meant to inform politicians that, like, when you're making laws about trans people, think about these things, and they include like banning research on trans women's ability to carry children. Like, what are trans atheists supposed to think when their introduction maybe to prominent atheists is someone saying like, hey, not only are you not your gender, but you don't even deserve research into like medical developments for your group of people. Like, that's, of course there are going to be people who are off put by that and maybe not as willing to step forward. I've been really lucky that I feel like this community has been really supportive of me, and maybe there's some like privilege going on there too. I'm sure the reason my voice was able to get to the forefront. And I definitely want to do my best to like not let that slip away, to make sure we are talking about these things all the time. Because I also love the atheist community so much. It is one of the first times I've really felt like I had a community that was deep and broad. And I want it to be full of more beautiful, diverse, queer lives. And unfortunately, until we start to contend with those things and we see more prominent people calling this stuff out, I don't think that's going to happen. Even just today, I saw a thread of somebody talking about, the atheist movement online and how toxic and anti-trans it was. And it's like, I get why you think that. I don't think it's the case broadly, and I do my best to try to change that, but I get why people think it, it's very present.
Yeah. Anything y'all would like to add to that?
I'll just go ahead and echo my sentiments about this community. I absolutely love it. And I will say that on the leadership side of things, because I engage a number of people in this movement, people on the ground, people at the head of organizations. And so the LGBTQ representation is improving. I mean, I myself identify as pansexual, but I will say though that cisgendered gay men are more well represented, perhaps than trans men and women, or non-binary. And certainly not people of color. Certainly people of color are less represented. So I will say that there are some changes there on leadership levels, which I think is, which I think is very important to acknowledge. And there are really, I've always encouraged people to, I try to stay away from the online community as much as possible, or at least reading into so many comments, because there really is important work being done on the ground. And I realize that for a number of people, the online spaces are not just cathartic, but this is where they connect with so many, and it's a good platform. But I always try to encourage people to go beyond the online space, because at times it doesn't represent real life.
Mhm.
And I get concerned at times that we become so disenchanted by those voices that we see being so harmful, that we forget about the people who are actually doing the good work, that we forget to support those who are on the ground. And I think that is where the frustration for people of color come in. It's like, well, and I know if I can speak for myself, I see a lot of, and rightfully so, there is a lot of criticism of, Dawkins and Harris and all of the other people, the people out there who at one time may have had some value, and some people still consider their work valuable. But as we see them transitioning into something that is that can be pretty detrimental, it's important that the other voices and the other people who are doing the work and are doing the right thing are more uplifted. And I think that it's important for us to remember that it's a two-parter. It's not just about tearing something down, it's also about building up. It's also about building up the other, and those who are coming behind them, those who are working alongside them. Let's just not forget that those of us who are out here are doing this work, and that there's and I sometimes I know that some people go by the idea that all publicity is good publicity, and yes, there is drama that does attract attention, but I personally prefer that the support aspect, the positive aspects of what we're doing. That is how things are going to change.
I agree absolutely, wholeheartedly. I completely empathize with the urge to burn it all down when it feels frustrating, but I do think we're going to be a lot stronger as a community, and we're going to be a lot more diverse and supportive of the members of our community if we continue to build each other up rather than tear it all down when it starts to get frustrating.
Sure.
Yeah. So I had an original point I wanted to make, but then Mandisa made me think of something else as well, really quickly. So I too identify as pansexual, and so I wonder if actually the queer community is more involved in atheist activism than we really know, because we'll look at a man and just assume he's straight, or look at a woman and assume she's straight, or assume that they're cis, right? And that's not necessarily the case. And so I think there might be just a lot of missing information there in terms of atheist activism and where the queer community overlaps with it. But then the other thing I was thinking of is I think about all the people that I know in the queer community, and the vast majority of them are activists in one way or another. Some just want to live their lives, and they just aren't outspoken, and they aren't ready for those battles for whatever reason. But those that are, they fight so many different battles on so many different fronts, and it can get exhausting and overwhelming. And I've even had a trans woman tell me, like, I don't feel like I should have to explain trans to every single person I come across, because like I shouldn't be the encyclopedia for all things trans, right? For the person who doesn't know any better, get on Google and do the research. And she had kind of a valid point that one individual shouldn't necessarily be the one that has to educate every single individual they come across. So I think about, and Arden could probably speak way more to that than I could, because this is just something I heard anecdotally. But going back to the original question, I wonder how many people in the queer community have their own different forms of activism, but atheism in and of itself just isn't something at the forefront of their of the importance in their life for whatever reason. They may still be atheists, and they may still be activists, but that specific platform isn't what they feel is the most important thing to attack right there at the moment.
Well, I know that this is a challenging question, and I don't know how fair it is, but I'm just gonna go ahead and ask it anyway. Mandisa, you made this distinction between like online spaces and maybe like real life spaces, but regardless of whether we're talking about online or the real world, I'm curious if y'all have experienced the atheist community as being more welcoming to women than sort of the general population, or whether there are at least pieces of our community, online or otherwise, that are maybe more challenging.
It did, I've found that I was generally like on the surface pretty much accepted. I didn't see that was necessarily an issue. However, when you get into it, when there are certain subjects that come up, or when you encounter certain people and how they treat you, that is when it becomes a challenge. Because we are still dealing with people who may be shedding that religious dogma, or even haven't checked their own privilege. there is a way that women might be treated, or when newcomers come in general. But I would say that most everyone is intentionally welcoming, and that there isn't any ill intent, but sometimes that's even worse, because even those who aren't ill-intentioned can still cause harm. And I think that's where we need to be more mindful. But I think like, especially like in-person spaces, or even in certain groups, for the most part, it's about on par with the men that are being, well, as far as being welcoming. I don't think I came into this community and was expected to be in a certain role, if you will. But I will say that upon further engagement, that is where things certainly rear their ugly heads.
Sure.
Yeah, I think I largely have the same experience. Like, I think outside of maybe the occasional, like, as you pointed out, the why do we always have to talk about social justice stuff comments, I think for the most part, everyone is pretty accepting, or at least interested in having the conversation, which is probably more than I can say for most other communities that I engage in personally, at least. Yeah.
So I'm going to be the odd one out here and say that I've never really experienced any sort of negative anything about the fact that I was a woman within this community or any community. It's funny, like as I move, I've been in the military, in Christian, Muslim. I would say it's more with what constraints were put on me, although they were self-imposed constraints, and then into the atheist community. The fact that I was a woman never made me feel disincluded from the community or separate from the community. So I've never had that experience. And even as an activist now online and doing content and speaking up, I've only ever seen in chat, oh, Laura made a good point, or oh, I really like what Laura had to say. And so I've always been, if anything, encouraged, not because of my gender, mind you, like, oh, that girl, she's really smart, nothing like that. But I've never felt up to this point that my gender has played any role. And so I wonder if it's just a matter of exposure or time or what, but I have to be the one that pushes back and says,
No,
yeah,
I'm glad to
never
hear
had
it.
that
Yeah.
problem.
No, absolutely. I had a moment very early on in my relationship with the atheist community of Austin, where we were like sort of talking about maybe doing this show, and would I be a good fit? Would I be interested in doing these kinds of things? And my partner came to the Free Thought Library and pointed out that there were tampons and things along those lines in the bathroom, and just how impressed she was by that, and how that was like her stamp of approval that, like, okay, this is an organization that, even though at that time, like, everybody in production, everybody who was like in doing their part to help develop the show was a man, she was like, you know what, but they seem like they're trying, they seem like they at least have their finger on the pulse. And that thought, that experience has always sort of stuck with me in a number of ways. But with all that in mind, I do want to remind folks that we have this incredible panel of people that we're talking to. I have so many more questions for these wonderful women, but if you would like to call in with your question, we'd love to hear from you. We're at 512-991-9242. And while you're grabbing your phones, while you're working up the courage, let's take a quick moment to see what's been going on around the rest of the ACA. To start off with, what's got you turned on this week?
Oh, well, aside from Timothy Chalamet every day.
Every day.
Yeah, I would be happy to be abandoned in a desert with him anytime.
Well, I definitely don't trust the Canadian government, Aaron. I just want to let you know, you guys are just a mining corporation in disguise.
Yeah.
And that is my stance.
And on Christmas Eve, the family beats the log with sticks and sings a song that translates to, if you don't crap well, we'll beat you with a stick.
Someone could in the future could look back at New York City and they could find a Spider-Man costume.
Exactly.
and then look at the Spider-Man comics, and that Spider-Man costume is not evidence that Peter Parker fought Dr. Octopus on the Brooklyn Bridge.
God wasn't enough for God. God needed more than God. That's what you're saying. God wasn't enough for himself.
The prime disappointer.
Timothy Chalamet.
I like God wasn't enough for God.
Well, I want to be really careful about getting into like women are like this and masculine energy is like that type of territory. You know, study after study seems to confirm that like within group differences vastly outstrip between group differences, and gender tends to have very little impact on cognition or personality or learning style, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So ultimately, I guess I want to ask why these questions matter. You know, why it is significant that there are more men in the atheist community, and whether or not it's valid to even be concerned about the impact that any of this is going to have on sort of the culture that we're creating here.
Yeah, I think, you know, when we're talking about like what we do here, right? Talking about the atheist activism and like addressing the harms that can be caused by religion, I think one of the most significant of those is the way that religion often exacerbates whatever underlying cultural things already affect marginalized people. So when we're talking about why it's so important to have women and trans women and Black women and all the genders and everything here, it's because when we're talking about the harms religion has caused, I think it's amplified on these marginalized groups. Whatever thing is already impacting even the most privileged cis man who's harmed by religion is compounded by those intersections of marginalization. So I know for me, that's why this is so important. I think my atheist activism and my trans activism have always been very, very tightly linked, because I can tell you that a lot of the issues and the baggage that I hold against myself and the people that I fight for, that I still know I carry that baggage, all of it comes from religion. And I would think, maybe naively so, that that would be easy to see and wouldn't be a fight ever, but it definitely, I mean, that's, you know, why it's shocking when people make those more SJW crap comments, right? Because it's like, come on, man, like you think religion impacted you, but like religion wasn't expecting these also insane, like wasn't expecting you to forego parts of your reality and like the nature of who you are to participate in it. So they're inextricable to me. That's why I think they're important.
Anything y'all would add to that?
Yeah, you know, it hasn't been that long since women couldn't vote. And it hasn't been that long since women couldn't get a bank account without their husband's signature or approval. Or that women couldn't get certain kinds of health care without their husband's agreement.
I was just about to say, I mean, that's still very much a
even
concern.
today.
Access to an abortion or a hysterectomy or these kinds of
requires
things.
husband's consent. Yeah, like the woman has to get the man's permission to have, like what you said, a hysterectomy. I think it's still, we have such a long way to go, but because women are now in the workforce and women now have voices on YouTube and stuff like that, we have this assumption that everything is all fine and dandy. And I mean, I think that's true with every marginalized demographic, kind of like what Arden was saying, is there's this tone from the outside of that demographic that why are we still talking about this? Why is there still an issue? Well, hopefully one day we won't have to talk about this. You know, sex won't be an issue, gender won't be an issue, race, skin color won't be an issue. But today they still are. And within our lifetimes and our grandparents' lifetimes, some of these issues were far, far, far worse. And we're just barely over the line of working towards fixing them. So it's going to continue to be a conversation until those people stop asking those questions and the conversation just naturally becomes obsolete.
So I'd like to add to all of that by saying that as long as we are continuing to deal with these gender quote unquote norms and gender stigmas, as well as direct impact and from institutional factors. We can't get around the fact that that the Black community is still impacted by institutional racism in as far as economic injustice and access and lack of access to to other to other societal, and we've been so impacted negatively by these stigmas that we have to continue to address, have the conversations, but also discuss how we can go about changing them. And as long as women, all women, continue to be impacted by by the decisions made on our reproductive health, this is going to be an issue. This is also going to be an issue. This is also going to be needs to be something that we need to discuss and challenge and address and continue to fight for. And so, as long as we are the ones being impacted, we must be the ones to speak on it. We must be the ones to allowed. We have to be allowed to effectively not just be heard, but also be supported, even by those who may not directly go through it. And you don't have to be directly impacted in order to understand what the problems are. That goes back to what you said, Christy, about there not being inherently any difference between the way men and women can comprehend certain things. It doesn't, just because you as a man may not necessarily be impacted by the ability to have an abortion, right? It doesn't mean that you cannot understand what the issue is and that you cannot fight for us. So I think as long as we are still dealing with these stigmas and in these institutional factors that many people aren't being honest enough to address within themselves, then we have to continue this.
Well said. Well, I know that just by being activists, by being out on the internet, by being atheists, by pushing back in any kind of way, we're all going to draw a little bit of fire. I mean, I even get the occasional mean YouTube comment. I always feel so honored by them. But I can't help but feel like when I am looking through the chat on a lot of ACA shows, even, but really across the internet, that there's a lot more vitriol targeted towards women. Is that fair to say? And do y'all experience, how do you feel that you've been received differently?
I mean, like, I think there's maybe an interesting conversation here. I don't know exactly about how I'm received by the people who are watching, but like, I think it's worth recognizing that like when women are held to the standard of like not only having to justify our intellect or the point we're making or something like that, there's also the expectation that we be pretty to look at for people. And I think a lot of the voices that get to the front are not just the voices that people want to hear, but they're the faces that people want to see. And I think because of that, sometimes a lot of these hateful people might like target your looks or something like that, because it's just a cheap way to knock you down a peg. They know that probably there are 50 people who are just like you, just as educated as you, but aren't forward facing because maybe they aren't as pretty as you or something. And so they can try to be like, they can either try to use that to tear you down or to just insult your appearance. I mean, that's so common. Like, the ACA has been great about regulating that. I know they have a very strong policy about commenting on host appearance, which I think is so helpful for women and queer people coming into the conversation. And yeah, I think that's something that this organization at least is very strong about.
Yeah, it seems innocuous at first to be like, oh, she's so pretty or these kinds of things, but you really do get it from both ends, because it's either like, I agree with you or disagree with you, but it's either you're ugly and ridiculous, or you are so pretty that that's the only reason that you're here. That nothing that you really said matters. And I definitely see that showing up in so many places online, particularly in these activist circles.
Yes, there are still so many people who are adhering again to these stereotypes, as well as these the unfair burden that we as women have to deal with, as far as like proving ourselves, right?
Mhm.
Like, and we've talked about this, Lauren and Arden, we definitely said that, right? You know, we have to work twice as hard to prove that we are just as worthy, if not more so, of the support that we need, as well as our voices being taken seriously. And oftentimes we often are we are the first to be subjected to be the butt of the jokes, or the butt of the subject of cruelty, when it comes to the comments, when it comes to how women are viewed. There is still a lot of negativity geared towards women, and that often seems to be the first thing that comes out whenever we are, whenever the comments come. It's interesting. I've always said, it's interesting how, especially for someone like me, you can go from being a queen to a bee in a heartbeat, especially if you don't, take too kindly to the comment about how pretty you are, or if we don't respond to basically what is the equivalent of catcalling, even online. So the moment we don't respond to that in a quote unquote positive way, oh, well, she's bitchy, or she's this and she's that. And then that makes us even more susceptible and more of a target. And like you said, I mean, once we put ourselves out there, we kind of expect it. Like I said, I have learned a long time ago to not take certain YouTube comments seriously. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that we're inhuman, and it doesn't mean that they don't affect us. And I think the more people just see us as being human, even though you may see us on these shows and on these screens, we are still human beings, and we still feel, and we have every right not to be accosted in such a way.
Yeah, sorry, I want Laura to be able to get in here. Like, an example that comes to mind is, I know that when I was on AXP with Shannon just last weekend, like, people always are commenting, either you use too big of words, I can't understand you, or like, oh, I can't understand X feature about her, or I can't stand it. This weird standard of having to like toe this line that's very narrow, right in the middle. If you go too far to the right of it, there's criticism. If you go too far to the left of it, there's criticism. You have to toe such a perfectly fine line to be an effective activist who people will listen to and platform, and to have your voice heard and respected and taken seriously. It's I think something that probably no one here has mastered. And if anyone does have it mastered, like, send me a book or something. I'd love to know your secrets.
Oh, Laura, I think you may be muted. At least you're not getting through to me.
I did. I was muted so I could drink and not have you guys hear the slurping. But yeah, I think once again, it comes back to a matter of exposure, where Arden and Mandisa have both been on a lot more popular shows and have a lot more exposure to people in chat and stuff like that. Whereas I'm kind of small potatoes and relatively new-ish to the scene. So I haven't really gotten a lot of vitriol or a lot of comments in chat. I have gotten a little bit of the catcalling, mostly in private. Things like, wow, you're hot or whatever. But it's been more, it's been easier to ignore because it's just not that prevalent for me, whether it's a yet or at all. But one thing I did think about while the two of them were talking is a lot of my negativity that I've experienced being out here and on the platform is my own self-doubt, is my own.
All right, well, we'll work on getting Laura's connection cleared up. But I wanted to ask how having fewer women within our community harms or maybe changes the community itself. Obviously, we've been talking about what it's like to be a woman in this community, but how is our community damaged by that?
Well, like
I
Arden
mean,
said, it becomes an echo chamber. Yeah, it becomes an echo chamber, and it reinforces this idea that only the men's voices matter. Now, I know that there have been a lot of concerns that women have had in this movement, and whether their voices or our voices are taken seriously, it does make a difference. And if they don't think that they are, then of course they're going to step away. And this is something that every organization should be, should be thinking about, that they should be considering, every time a woman speaks up. It doesn't necessarily mean that we are always going to be correct, or that, there's always, but however, knowing that we are heard and also understood makes a huge difference. And it shouldn't be too much of a task in order for that to take place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would have to add to that is kind of like we were saying earlier, where like when it is just the boys club, and they're talking about all of these groups and communities and the different intersections within the atheist community in the abstract, they don't have to wrestle with the realities of our needs. Like what are the material conditions of this group of people? Like what are their emotional states like how are they listened to and things like this. When it's just the boys club, that's the real aspects of what they need aren't heard. And now that we are being given a platform and given a voice, I think we can have more serious discussions about how women interact with the atheist community and things like that, because we're here to talk about our needs and how to integrate us more effectively into the community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but Laura's back. Yay.
Well, I am incredibly encouraged by everything that I've been seeing in the chat tonight. I am so proud of the community that this show in particular has gathered. The folks that I see showing up week after week just seem to be incredible people, and the people I interact with on Facebook. Like I am just so amazed by the people who have found this show. But outside of that, I guess I'm curious about how you sort of imagine the larger community responding to this line of questioning. If you raise the issue of, hey, are there enough women in our organization? Are we doing enough to make women feel comfortable? How is that generally reacted to?
Well, I can't speak for YouTube, but I know that. Well, I definitely
Arden, you
I go
go
picking
first?
fights sometimes with the more difficult people.
Sure.
I think generally speaking, when I'm talking about like, hey, we need more trans voices, we need more diverse trans voices, and like just more diversity in general in the community, people generally agree with me that, at least here at the ACA, maybe I'm biased by having such a kick-ass sample of people to work with, but generally speaking, I think people are excited and on board to let the community grow and flourish.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's when I'm not picking my own fights.
Laura, does that feel true to you as well, that there is a desire, kind of broadly speaking, to make that ratio of like 7 to 3 men perhaps shift, and to bring more women into our community, and to bring more queer people and more minorities into our community? Does that resonate?
Yeah, I think that it's yes. In short, I think that there is a strong drive to be inclusive. I do hear those voices, like we talked about earlier, that have all those unconscious biases that they have to work through and that just don't understand or still have some social programming that's holding them back. But I think for the most part, this is one of the most inclusive communities that I've been a part of, and people that are the most eager to understand others and actually advocate for others. Like I know people within the atheist community more so than the other communities who want to advocate on behalf of people who are different from them. And that, to me, I think that's the point of social justice. I don't think the point is for people within these marginalized groups to be the ones doing all the work. I think the point of social justice or equality in general is for people outside those groups to come and say, hey, what can I do to help? And how can I make this better? And how can I better understand what's going on?
And I see that a lot more in this community. And so that gives me a lot of hope. And it actually is one of the reasons why I enjoy doing this and being an activist, is because I do see that this is a place where our voices can be heard and where we can actually make a difference.
Yeah, well, I want to make sure to get Mandisa's take on all of this as we're working to get her back connected. Mandisa, are you here with us?
Yes, I
Well,
am.
while we're
I am back.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm really interested in your take as to whether or not this there's like a meaningful push to make the atheist community, at least in large organizations, more accessible to women, to queer folks, to minorities of different stripes. Do you feel like the leadership in general is pulling in the right direction?
Yeah, so that's I will say overall yes. What I have
Sure.
found over the years is that there's a tendency to be defensive. And I can understand that because the organizations are trying to do their best with the resources that they have, right? And some of them are a bit older, some of them are a bit more they kind of cater to their larger donor base or who their larger donors are, which can be an issue. So they have
Sure.
their hearts are in the right place. There may be my concern is the consistency, you know, just only doing it for a period of time and then it stops. That's the concern I have because the changes need to be more long term. Are they being implemented in policy? You know, are these things that you are taking seriously on a regular basis? And if there are organizations that you are working with, for example, like Black non-believers, are you only are you only looking to us to try to resolve that diversity issue for a time being, or is it something that are you just trying to use us to just recruit and then you're cultivating the same culture? And so there are a lot of things that go into what needs to change. And usually and what happens is sometimes there's a fear, whether it's recognized or not, that when you have more women, when you have more people of color, that things that there are traditions that are going to be challenged, and there are people who are scared of that. And I've seen this happen as I've served on various boards and worked with other organizations. You know, the ones who are truly dedicated are taking our voices seriously and actually implementing those changes and for long term. And so that's where it's really going to count, where where we see the culture and the environment changing for the better, where not just the further marginalized groups are retained, but that there are things that are changing for the better within the organization itself. And for some people, it's going to be uncomfortable. It will, but it's necessary in order for these things to truly take place.
Yeah, I'll just echo that as a therapist. If your lifestyle is not making you at least a little bit uncomfortable, it's worth asking yourself if you're really like growing and challenging yourself in some meaningful ways, in the ways that you really need to. Now, I know we're getting a little bit long, and I want to give Arden a chance to take us to the phones here in just a moment. But I wanted to make sure to take a second to ask each of you if there's anything that you sort of suspect that the men around you in the community don't know about what it's like being a woman at a atheist convention, at the Free Thought Library, or in the Discord servers or on social media. Is there anything that you imagine the men around you just don't know about your experience?
I mean, I feel like there's a lot of things. Just kind of touching on, we talked earlier about how the AC has like a really strong policy on commenting on people's looks and How often have we seen somebody be like, I thought I was just paying a compliment. I didn't know I was being rude. Like but I mean, when I'm talking about this, I'm realizing as I'm saying it that I don't even know if that's necessarily like an atheist community problem with men. I think it can kind of just be it's kind of an issue with men not understanding
Well, I think that's
the
fair to
experiences
say,
of
but
women
there are still
generally.
men in this community that maybe haven't encountered that idea or haven't been challenged around that.
And I think it's maybe normal in some degree to, when you're encountering a new idea like that, to push back. Like, I think most people don't want to think of themselves as a bigot or a sexist or something. And when they're kind of confronted with that realization, like, oh shit, I might be doing something wrong here, they kind of bulk back in a way that's maybe not always helpful or productive. But I think while maybe the same elements of patriarchy that are present in all of our culture are definitely present in the atheist community, I do think people have been, on average, more willing to contend with that and to have a conversation about it.
Sure. Yeah, I'll say that, and I want to be careful about apples and oranges and all of that. But when I look at my online space, it's usually divided pretty evenly between like college sports, atheist activism, and like poly queer type spaces, which is my own eclectic blend. And I will say one of my favorite things about the atheist community is when somebody says like, hey, this asshole has been stalking me online. Hey, this asshole sent me an unsolicited dick pic. Hey, this asshole, has been harassing me. That at least in online spaces, that in the atheist community, people respond very quickly and very strongly and in support of women in those moments. And I really appreciate that about this community. At the same time, I wonder how many men really realize just how many unsolicited dick pics there are. It feels like something we maybe talk about a lot, but I don't know that we're talking about it enough, just considering how common it really can be. But I don't mean to step in here. Laura, Mandisa, was there anything in particular that you feel like maybe the men in our community don't know about your experience?
I would say one thing is that overall, and I'm not speaking for all women, but we can tend to be a lot more intimidated or frightened than you think so, or a lot more annoyed and overwhelmed than you think. So we might be strong personalities in terms of those of us who are outspoken, and the ones who are maybe less outspoken, you might just look at and be like, oh, she's just shy or she's just not talkative. But as women, there's a lot more fear out there that we're going to get harassed, like the dick pics that Christy was talking about, or just the getting hit on. I can't tell you how many people like send me unsolicited Facebook friend requests, and I don't even know who they are. And the vast, vast, vast majority of them are male. And and early on, when I first started this little adventure of mine, I didn't know to not accept some of these friend requests. So some of them did turn into a lot of like, oh, I think you're really great. I think you're really awesome. And just a lot of like conversations that needed borders added to them. But you had mentioned conventions, right? So now we're not just talking about online spaces, we're talking about physical spaces. And there, the intimidation and the fear goes up even more. So if there's anything that I want men to understand from a women's perspective, it's, to understand that threat and that intimidation and that fear is there for most women. And it's valid for most women, because a lot of us have had a lot of either sexual harassment or even sexual assault in the past. And so we're carrying around a lot of emotional baggage that you may not even know exists. So stepping back and being respectful, or at least understanding that intimidation exists, and that we might be just putting on a strong face, is a good thing for men to know.
Sure, I'll just echo that and say very broadly, as somebody who has spent the last several years helping people to work to heal from sexual assault, I don't think, generally speaking, that men in our culture realize just how incredibly, incredibly, incredibly common that experience is. But Mandisa, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah. Yes, I think it's important for more men to understand that, and I'm going to go a bit of the opposite of Laura, that, some of us are, many of us are approachable, but at the same time, you don't just get to approach us simply with your point of view, and that they should be opening to listening. And then when we tell them when we tell you what we need, then it's not just oh, well, you just get up and do it because I told you to, but take us seriously, when we tell you something, and learn how to kind of read your room, learn how to to kind of interpret and think about what someone I may be thinking, or take some cues here. If someone doesn't want to be bothered, then you need to back away. And if someone tells you something that, or if they don't necessarily agree, or they're not interested, that isn't your opportunity to try to push more. And I will say that I've encountered a lot of respectful people. Most of the conventions that I attend tend to be pretty fun. There are some great people there. There are quite a few incidents of harassment. And, I definitely think, and I am one that, Christy, you were talking about online spaces and how, we manage that. I know I manage that. And most of our men in BN will tell you that I manage our online spaces very, very efficiently. And if someone is being problematic, then, hey, they are removed, because sometimes you have to do that. But I will say that for the in-person interaction, there are a lot of people who I found to be very, very respectful, very friendly, but sometimes very awkward, and sometimes you don't know when to stop the conversation and know when you should at least give a person space. And I think there are more men who shouldn't always have to tell you what that is. Sometimes you just try to understand and ask questions. Is this okay? Is this if you have, definitely ask more questions about what we may be feeling in that moment, in order to improve our engagement.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you kind of wrapping up this conversation on that positive note, and just knowing that we're doing a lot of things right within this community, even if there is definitely things to be working on. Now, I know that we are getting a little bit late. I'm so grateful that we were able to have this conversation. But we do have at least one call on the line that I think we can sneak in under the wire. Arden, you want to bring that up for us?
Yeah. Okay, let's bring in Sabrina in Canada. Pronouns are she, her. Sabrina, what's going on?
Oh, it's nice to be called that name. It really is. Obviously, you can tell from my voice that I'm still quite masked, but I just very recently came out as trans and mentioned something in the chat, and people were like, oh, call in. I'm like, okay. It hasn't even been a month since I sort of accepted this about myself, and I'm definitely figuring a lot of things out. I'm still kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, not sure how to approach this going forward. Wasn't sure if anybody would have any advice or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. Wow. This is awesome. God, that's such a big question. Where to?
Sorry.
No, don't apologize. I think if there's any solace I can give you, maybe, is that, for one, there's like no right or wrong way to do it. Like, right now, you're on the path to finding out what's going to make you the happiest and the most comfortable in your skin, and however that path ends up for you is okay. Well, sure, definitely, we do have like some data on certain things that we know help trans people, or at least on average help trans people, like certain gender affirming procedures or hormones or whatever. It's your life to live, and your journey to decide how it should go. So there's definitely no like right or wrong way to do it. Like, if you choose not to do something that you think is really common, that's super A-okay. So if there's any, like, it sounds like you're kind of walking on eggshells a little, and I just want to like maybe give you the comfort to know that you can like fully step on those eggshells, and that's cool. Like I think maybe part of transition is almost firmly stepping all over the eggshells and then getting like 2 or 3 years down the line, looking back and going like, oh shit, I really stepped all over those eggshells, didn't I, back there? And then just kind of being like, oh, well, I'm just going to keep going, live your life.
Yeah, makes sense. While I'm at work sometimes, so I'm not out at work. For the most part, I'm only out to my friends, and I'll be coming out to my sister in a week when I go to see her at her place. But I'm just like, especially tonight when I was at work, it's the reason I missed the first half of the show. I just like, I was at the end of my shift. I'm just like, I want to come out to them. I want to tell them, but I was also really scared to do so. Again, since I've only just started this, I'm still obviously very mask appearing, and I'm not. I don't know. I want to move forward, but I also don't want to. I don't know, cause problems in the process.
Yeah, it's a brutally slow process. I definitely remember getting like handed my HRT for the first time and being like taking those pills and then just kind of like sitting there being like, okay, do I feel anything? Do I feel anything yet? Is anything happening? Like it is painful how slow it can be sometimes, but I'm so happy you're here and that you found this community, and I hope that you feel welcome and safe here and know that we see you and we're glad to have you here.
Well, thank you so much. And mentioning the getting handed the pills, I'm quite envious because I am handing them out to all my trans patients, and I'm like, I want some too. Oh boy, because I work as a pharmacy technician, and so just have a lot of trans. I was even speaking with one tonight just before I came in, just to let her know her stuff was ready, and she was like, oh, I was wondering if you had anything fun, interesting for me. I'm like, no, but hopefully I'll have something. I wasn't sure if she got the comment or not, but I feel like I could obviously share it more with my patients than my colleagues. Boy. Sorry, obviously I'm a bit nervous at this point, but
No, I really appreciate you connecting with us, and just sharing this experience with us. I loved everything that Arden had to say, and I certainly don't have any firsthand advice for you, but I guess I just want to encourage you that, you know who you are, certainly better than anybody else does. You're the singular expert of the 7.5 billion people on the planet. Like, you're the one who knows you, but also there's no test and you're not expected to get it right. You don't need to feel like you 100% know yourself. You never will. And so I'm so excited that you feel comfortable starting to share this part of yourself with other people and to open up and to start to explore. And I just want to remind you that you 100% have permission to shift and to stay curious and to say, oh, I think I might be a binary trans woman. Or you might decide a month later that, oh, well, maybe I'm not a binary trans woman. Maybe I'm somewhere more towards the middle of the spectrum, or to, change the way that you identify entirely. It's not to say that you're changing. I mean, obviously there is some fluidity there, but it's complicated to get your head wrapped around all of this. And so while we're going to trust you to do the best possible job that anybody on the planet could do, I just want to make sure you know that you have permission to stay curious, to maybe stick your neck out a little bit, and to maybe even be wrong from time to time should that come up. I don't want you to ever feel like you can't, quote, take it back, or that you are not allowed to perhaps like shift in the way you say those things. So if you do introduce yourself in one particular way, you don't need to feel locked into it, and you don't necessarily need to hesitate before doing so. And I just want to take a moment to say, when you get off the phone, please make sure that you go back to check out the chat from this episode, because it is just a stream of people. Yeah, I'm glad to hear it, because this community is incredibly proud of what you're doing and incredibly eager to support you. So thank you so much for just sharing all of this with us.
Thank you so much. And to viewers as well as you guys as well, if ever want to chat with me, I'm always hanging out in the ACD. I'm actually a facilitator over there as well, but yeah, just I'm always hanging out there. We have a mutual friend in Stephanie Helms as well. So
Oh,
anyway,
awesome. We love Stephanie.
oh, I love
Great.
Stephanie so much. She's been so helpful.
Well, I just want to jump in really quick because I know that you called wanting advice, and I know that that's something that as a as a cis white woman, I'm in a position of privilege, and I haven't had any experience with a lot of what you're going through. So, unfortunately, like Christy, I can't give advice, but I want to share just how excited I am for you because I can hear your excitement in your voice. I can hear the nervousness and the anxiety, but I can hear this edge of excitement, and I'm very empathetic, and so that makes me just so excited for you. Like my heart is beating and racing on your behalf right now, and when I get on and do these shows, I don't have that heart rate problem. Like I'm calm as a kitten, right? So I just wanted to let you know that like there are people out there that just want to get behind you, even if we're not sharing the same experience or we don't know what advice to give or what to say or what to do. We want to be there for you. And so I just wanted to kind of share my love and support to you right now.
Oh, thank you so much, Laura, and everyone. Also, I want to highlight that you say you're speaking from a position of privilege, and there is a privilege there, but there's also a privilege that I have had that you don't have in the sense that I've grown up assumed male for a long time, and so there's a lot of experiences that you and Mandisa and other cis women have that I don't have, and so you don't minimize the contribution that you would have to offer me. Definitely, like there's so much I can learn from my cis sisters as well, and it's definitely important there.
I love that. I really appreciate that. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. I really appreciate this call, and I hope to hear from you again in the future.
Thank you so much. I will definitely be calling in again, and I'll probably call you on your other shows as well, Arden.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. Have a good night, Sabrina.
Okay. Good night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Lovely way to cap off the show.
Yeah. Well,
beautiful.
I guess that just about does it, huh? So why don't we dive into our little outro? I would love to give Mandisa and Laura a chance to plug what they're doing. Mandisa, you want to go first? Oh, I think you might be muted.
And I was sorry about that. Yeah, so can y'all hear me now? Yeah, thank you once again for having me on the show. I'm happy to be here this evening. For those of you who are interested in the work of Black Nonbelievers, please visit our website at blacknonbelievers.org. You can follow us. We do have a YouTube channel at Black Nonbelievers Inc. We are on Instagram, Be Nonbelievers Inc. We are on Twitter at Be Nonbelievers, and the B and the N are capitalized. And we're also on Facebook. And you can subscribe to my Patreon at patreon.com/Mandisa Latifa. So thank you once again. Please do visit our website and support our work.
Awesome. How about you, Laura?
Thank you. Yeah, I do a lot of my work with the ACA on nonprofits. So I've got 3 different spots that I'm on the schedule for between January and February. So super, super busy with the nonprofits. And I also, you'll see me in chat as Unapologetically Me. So I do have that page, but I've been putting a lot of my energy and effort into the Skeptic Hangout podcast, where we just we pick a topic and we just sort of discuss it from our perspectives as skeptic atheists and sort of what can we know about it, what do we know about it, and where the mysteries are. And so yeah, I've been putting a lot of my energy toward that.
Awesome. Well, I love to hear it. I love to hear you both doing awesome things, and I hope everyone in the audience goes through and follows through all those links and checks them out. Do it. Don't skip out on it. Do it. But with that said, we're gonna push the usual stuff. So if you've liked what you've seen here and you want to catch any of the other productions we do here at the ACA, we have a one-stop shop. You can go to tiny.cc/AEN podcast, where you get all the atheist community of Austin stuff that we do in one place. We'll also plug our Facebook Secular Sexuality fan group. So you can head there to jump in all the fun little discussions that are happening throughout the week when you don't see our lovely faces on the screen. We've also got tiny.cc/ACD Discord. That's the atheist community Discord, where, well, we're not doing one this week. After most of our shows, we'll stop in and do a little Q&A after the fact, and you can get in discussions there yourself as well. We've also got tiny.cc/merch ACA, where you can get any of your ACA branded apparel if you want to feel yourself, if you want to brag about how secularly sexual you are to all your peers. That's how you can do that. And then, of course, most importantly, we would like to have our crew cam up. The crew who pulled together a 4-up out of nowhere on
at the absolute last possible minute. Made this show happen. Thank y'all so much.
And that's all I got. Christy, you want to ship us out?
Yeah, I'm just my heart is very full tonight. You know, there was a moment when I sat down for pre-production and they were like, well, the show's on fire, everything is on fire, and there are storms in Australia, and somehow now everything is ruined. I was like, okay, great. And while I sat here kind of chewing on my nails, a incredible community pulled together. Laura and Mandisa came at the last minute. There were so many people making phone calls and putting things together behind the scenes. And then we get together and we have this conversation. And I see the incredible chat just responding to so many of the things that we're talking about and being so encouraging of one another, encouraging of women in this community, and encouraging of the queer folks and the trans folks that this show is largely centered around. And I am just so incredibly thankful to each and every one of you for being a part of this. And you know what? I think you've all earned it. I think this is absolutely a moment where you should take a quiet time for yourself and give yourself a big old orgasm. Or better yet, give somebody else one.
Watch The Atheist Experience live Sundays at 4:30 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTAXP and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callaxp.